Hi guys, hi, how's it going? How y'all doing today? Hopefully today finds you well. Today I am doing a video that I've seen a couple times. Like, this isn't unheard of. I don't know who the absolute creator of this content was, but this is just me reminiscing about some of the declutters that I've done and some of the products that I'm actually really sad that I decluttered, that I think about all the time, that I think about repurchasing if I could. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, please keep on watching. For those of you new here, hi, my name is Donna. I'm a lover of all things high-end, colorful beauty and self-care. And ultimately, this is my self-care. I like to come to you, talk to you about the good, the bad, the ugly, all things beauty that come in and out of my life. And just really like getting to know this beautiful beauty community I call home, and I hope that you're here for it. And if you find that this channel, myself, my video brings solace to your soul in the way it brings solace to mine, I hope that you'll subscribe before you go, because I would love to welcome you into my crazy YouTube fam here. Let me know down in the comment section that you've done so, though, because I want to welcome you personally. And with that said, let's walk into this makeup products I'm sad I decluttered. All right, so I don't have a long list. Like, typically when I am doing like declutters, declutters is something that we all here on the makeup space do for the most part, whether it's 1 or 2 items or 50 items or whatever it is. I have a declutter series that I do every single year at the beginning of the year after my inventory, so that by that time I have gone through my inventory. I know what exists in my inventory, and I know like kind of what I'm not into and what I am into at that point. So I have had about, at this point, 7 years of declutters on my YouTube channel. I actually think it might be more like 5, because the first couple years I was just like trying to build my makeup collection. So it might be more like 5, but either way, I have quite a few declutters, collection and declutter videos here on my channel. I'll link those videos up in the cards for you, that playlist anyways. And like, really just thinking back to some of the declutters that I have made in my collection, there's only a handful of products that stand out today that I remember fondly today that I have decluttered in the past. And so this is the products that I decluttered, that I regret decluttering. And I'm gonna scooch over so that I can put some pictures in here, because obviously I don't have these products anymore. Typically too, just not a disclaimer, I guess, but when I declutter items, I do put them into a basket that still lives with me in my space. I mean, as long as they're products that could be passed down to somebody else, I keep them in a basket. Cream products, lipsticks, those kind of things, I do toss. But typically everything goes into a basket. And I mean, so I have ample opportunity to go in and pull these things out if I decide that I want to bring them back into my collection. I very rarely do that. I think I've done that like twice. Once with an ABH blush palette that really is probably going to get decluttered again this year, because I pulled it back into my collection last year and haven't used it since. So like, there is that, but I typically don't dig back in and pull these things out because I just know that they're probably not going to get used. But all of these things either went into the garbage or went to a different home, so I can't pull them back out. And I'm sad about it. I'm sad about it. When I think back about on these products, I think of them fondly. So first and foremost, I have 2 palettes that were my very first palettes ever. And I wish I had kept them just for the like nostalgia of it all. They were Smashbox palettes, and I had the Smashbox full exposure and double exposure palettes. And I remember I remember full exposure and double exposure both being kind of boring, honestly, and definitely maybe not the avenue that I fall into as it pertains to like the love of eyeshadow that I have now, and or maybe even really early on in my YouTube space. But I owned these palettes before I ever knew anything about makeup, to be honest. And the double exposure palette, the one that was more colorful, I remember coming out on the market, this innovative formulation in which you could get these shadows wet and they would totally perform differently on your eye than if they were dry. And now we know that that is pretty much the standard. Like if you put a setting spray or something over the top of an eyeshadow, it's going to look a little bit more opaque. It's going to look a little bit more sparkly. It's going to, like, it is what it is. That said, these were my very first eyeshadow palettes. So, and I used the poop out of them. I think that the top one, I had so many, the full exposure palette, I think I had so many pans in that eyeshadow palette because it was all I owned for like 10 years. It was crazy sauce. But I think of these palettes fondly, and I think of them fondly because it was just an era of my life where I really wasn't inundated with all the makeup that I have now. I had one choice or two choices, and these were the choices. So these are what I used. And I created some really beautiful looks, some beautiful as it pertains to that time and place in my life, but I really do think about these palettes quite often. I remember when I decluttered it, one of my friends wanted to purchase those palettes too, and I was like, absolutely not. They're like 10 years old. Like I'm not shipping them to you. They're gross. I'm not selling them to you. That would be robbery. I'm not doing it. Absolutely not. The next thing I have on here is the Too Faced Papa Don't Peach blush, and I loved this blush, but again, I owned this way back in the day, before I had a makeup room, before I had a studio, before I had all the makeup that I have. It was one of the only blushes that I used and really was the catalyst for me falling in love with a glowy peach blush. However, it was also a time and place where I stored most of my makeup in the bathroom because I still had enough space in the bathroom to store my makeup, and it got like moisture damage to it. So I ended up having to toss that just because of the damage that had happened to that blush. But man, that was a beautiful blush. And I remember back in the day it being like equated to NARS Orgasm, but I don't really like NARS Orgasm, and I really love this blush. So I think it's just a little bit more pink in tone and a little bit more, it sunk into the skin, I feel like a little bit better than a NARS powder blush did, and really did not, even though it was glowy, like exacerbate any kind of like texture or fine lines and wrinkles, which I didn't necessarily have all those things, but even the fine lines and wrinkles around my eyes, because you guys, I wear my blush like clear up here, it didn't really exacerbate any of that movement in my eye, and it was just a really pretty blush, and I really liked it. Probably hands down my favorite Too Faced product ever. The next thing I have is the Lorac Ocean Sunset palette. Now this palette here I purchased with two other palettes. So I had the Ocean Sunset, Mountain Sunset, and some other sunset. I can't remember. My sister came and visited me and she fell in love with this palette, and I ended up giving this palette to my sister, and I did declutter the other two. But this one was so pretty. It was my favorite of the three, but it also was a palette that I didn't 100% fall in love with because it was really light and a little bit more muted than I liked my makeup to be back then. Again, in your face, like glam light paint palette kind of makeup was all that I was wearing back then. It really didn't fall in line with those things, so I was, you know, quick to give it up, but I remember this palette fondly. And I was at my sister's house not long after I had decluttered it to her. She had used the poop out of that palette, so I'm really glad that I was able to declutter it to somebody who was going to get that kind of use out of it, because it was just truly a beautiful palette. It had a beautiful like pink packaging. The packaging was really kind of innovative for its time. Like it rolled, it didn't have a mirror or anything like that, but it was just a really pretty palette. Reminds me a lot of like maybe a Lime Crime palette, like Color Story, and there was this beautiful like minty green shade in it. It was truly a beautiful shade, but I didn't really 100% love it in those moments. Really glad my sister got as a great amount of use out of it, because God knows I'm not using my palettes like that, and this palette would probably be still sitting in my collection going unused today if I had not decluttered it to her. So there's that. The next thing I have on here is Fenty Diamond Balm Highlighter. Now, I decluttered this because it was straight up glitter. And I still don't really love glitter. But like, knowing what I know now about putting that kind of highlighter on my face, I really feel like I could have worked with it just a little bit longer and gave it a little bit more of a chance. It truly was a beautiful, like, wet effect highlighter, while also kind of being in your face, while also kind of being subtle. And I love that about that highlighter. And I know that this is still for sale, but I feel stupid because I decluttered this highlight when I had only used it like 2 or 3 times. And I was like, I hate this thing. It's going bye-bye. I'm decluttering it. It's full of glitter. That's all it is. Goodbye. I used it 3 times. I think it went to a good home. I cannot remember. Most of my declutters do go to a good home. I cannot remember where it went overall. But this last year I purchased the Rose Pave one, and I'm so happy to have that in my collection. But I wasn't going to purchase the Diamond Bomb one because I used it 3 times and feel dumb that I used it, decluttered it, and now I want it back in my collections. There's that. I think that I just didn't know. I just didn't know. Like, how dumb am I? Another palette that I have on this, you might be surprised by, because I'm kind of surprised by it. It's actually 2, and it is the e.l.f. Bite Size Cream and Sugar and e.l.f. Bite Size Rose Water palette. And I think that the biggest reason why I regret decluttering those is because they were literally $3 quads that are literal perfection for travel. And yes, I know I could go get another e.l.f. Bite Size palette, but I had them. So, and I know that they will likely go unused in my collection. I have so many other, like, smaller even palettes, like my Natasha Denona Quince or whatever, that I would pull for before I would purchase those. But I think through the lens of like some of the Natasha Denona Quince that I have purchased recently that are still living in my drawer of shame, which tells me this is the reasons why I should not pick up these 2 palettes. And they are similar in tone to those Quince that I now have in my drawer of shame. And I should have just kept these 2 palettes in my collection because I would not have been motivated to purchase those Quince if they were still in my collection. They were good, solid formulation. And I mean, for a $3 eyeshadow, they were bomb for $3, but they were also good, period. So I could see in another time and place, like me purchasing those all over again just to have them in my collection. I don't need to. And they were amazing. And they were also part of a, like, my friend JC bought them for me for a, like, subscriber buys my makeup video that we did together. And that was super fun. So they also bring back, like, nostalgic memories for me. I just wish I would have kept them, but I'm not going to go out and repurchase them. But they were good palettes. And I think about them fondly for sure. I also have the Cover FX shimmer veils on here, and I got these in a BoxyCharm maybe, or a FabFitFun, I can't remember which, but they were liquid eyeshadows by Cover FX, and I had, I think, 4. I had Amethyst, Halo, Moon, Dust, something. I had 4 different ones, and the one specifically that I think about often is Amethyst. Now, these did live in my collection for a very long time, and I do think that I ended up decluttering them because they started to smell not great, and I mean, they're eyeshadows, so don't put that stuff on your eyes. Just don't do it. So I ended up decluttering them. I don't think that you can purchase them anymore, or I might purchase the Amethyst one because I really did love it. It was this beautiful, like, lavender, like, holographic, like, thought process to it, and it was so pretty, and it was the perfect, like, inner corner highlight for just like a pop of a different color. And they were cream eyeshadows or liquid eyeshadows before liquid eyeshadows were actually a big thing. So I really did like that. And I remember when I decluttered them, I was so sad to have to declutter them, but I decluttered them because they just didn't smell good anymore, and you can't put that stuff on your face, you guys, let alone your eyes. I also decluttered a highlight by Estate Beauty that was a highlight that I remember decluttering, bringing back into my collection, and then decluttering again. And I know that I think of this fondly. That's the reason why it ended up back in my collection. I also know that this highlight specifically still sits over in that declutter basket that I have, but I know I cannot bring this. I can't even bring it out and I can't even bring it out and swatch it, because if I do, I will bring it back into my collection. There's no reason for it. It is kind of a powdery highlight, let's be honest, but it is such a beautiful, like, cool tone, like icy highlight, and that is like my sweet spot for highlights. So I think fondly of this highlight for that reason, but I have decluttered it now twice and brought it back into my collection once, and I don't need to bring it back into my collection, but it is a highlight I think about all the time because it is just so pretty. Again, really great for inner corner, really great for even just cheek highlight, really great for Cupid's bow. It was just such a perfect highlight, and I did get a lot of use out of it, but you couldn't tell it was a baked formula. So it reminds me a lot of a more powdery, more matte version of the Rare Beauty Silky Touch highlights that she has. Really pretty, but so in your face and so powdery. I have two more palettes on here. So the Alamar Reina del Caribe palette, the volume number 1. I remember getting that in a BoxyCharm and swatching like 2 of the shimmer shades on my hand in that moment and just like dying. This was at a point in time where I didn't have much in my collection. I was subscribed to BoxyCharm and Ipsy and FabFitFun, trying to get all the makeup things into my collection in a good solid way. And it was like shimmers on crack. Like, they were the best, most impactful shimmers I had ever seen in my life. And that's not saying much, because Smashbox, just a reminder, those 2 palettes didn't have fantastic shimmers. They did not have fantastic shimmers, but it was such a beautiful palette. And when I ended up decluttering that palette, I ended up decluttering it because it was old, it was indie, and it was growing something in it. I'm not sure if it was mold, I'm not sure what it was, but it was in the mattes, not necessarily the shimmers. And I just wish I had pulled out the one like kind of like greeny gold shimmer, because that one was so pretty. It was my favorite shade of eyeshadow for so long, and I could do wonderful things with that shadow now that I thought I was good at before. And it brings back so many memories of opening that BoxyCharm box on camera and like swatching that and just being like, oh my God, that's so pretty. These days, I don't think it would hold a candle to some of the shimmers in my collection, but I remember just being enamored by that palette when I first got it. I think about it quite often. And the other palette, the last palette on this collection in this, and then I just have a couple other highlights and then one more thing that's kind of like a generalization. But the last palette I have in here is the BH Zodiac palette. Like, this palette I purchased because I had a friend here on YouTube. Her name was Lisa I. She had a channel here on YouTube. I don't think that she does anything on YouTube anymore, but I do occasionally catch up with her on Instagram. She's occasionally posting some things on Instagram. And I purchased this palette because of her, and it was my first venture into BH Cosmetics. And man, did that open up a whole slew of different kinds of things that I wanted to get into, from different brands that I wanted to get into from the like drugstore beauty sector and BH Cosmetics. And honestly, at one point in time, I think I had something like 6 or 7 different BH Cosmetics, maybe even 9 BH Cosmetics palettes, because I was just in love with that Zodiac palette. BH was also a brand that came in BoxyCharm quite often. I think I had a Carnival and a Weekend Festival palette from them, from BoxyCharm. There's quite a bit that was coming in BoxyCharm, but honestly, it was one of the only drugstore brands that I thought was so great. And the biggest catalyst to that was this BH Cosmetics Zodiac palette. And this is a palette that people talk about all the time. Like, you were not part of the YouTube space back then unless you knew something or had used or had yourself the BH Zodiac palette. It was such a really pretty palette. The whole external part of the palette, it was like real like celestial looking, right? It looked like a sunburst or something. And the whole outside of the shadows had like all of the baked eyeshadow formulas that were shimmers and were stunning. And then the internal were like square pans or rectangle pans of the mattes, which were awful. And then the center was a highlighter, and the highlight was also awful. But those baked eyeshadows were so good. And I would say if you could take out a baked eyeshadow and repress it and have the same eyeshadow at the end of the day, then I would have done that with those shadows. But a baked eyeshadow just looks different when you take it out and repress it. It's just not the same. And I was afraid that I would not like them after I repress them. And also, let's just be honest, single shadows kind of get lost in my collection, which is why I do my Build Your Own Palette series, right? So I knew that I wasn't going to get any use out of it after I repressed them, pulled them out, depotted, repressed. So I just didn't, and I ended up decluttering the whole palette because honestly, the outside, the baked eyeshadows was all I was using out of that palette ever. The mattes in the center were awful, probably worst BH Cosmetic matte formula, in my humble opinion, was in that Zodiac palette. And I know that their formulation changed quite a bit after that Zodiac palette. I think it was one of their first, and then the center like highlighter was just so gross and glittery and chunky and looked awful on the skin, was a catalyst for exacerbation of texture. So I didn't use most of the palette. So it didn't, and it was kind of bulky. So it just didn't make any sense to keep it. So I did declutter it, but it is a palette that I think about all the time. And I do think that you can repurchase it, and there is like a second one too that you can purchase at the same time. But again, like all the other palettes, I have so many beautiful palettes in my collection. I just know I won't get any use out of that, but it is a palette that I regret decluttering because it would be interesting to pick it up today and see how it performs. I also have the Artist Couture Diamond Glow powders on here. These were loose powder highlighters. And when I decluttered them, and to be honest, I'm still not a fan of using a loose powder, not even a translucent loose powder. I'd rather have like a pressed powder to use. So when I decluttered these, I got both of them in BoxyCharm. One was Summer Haze and one was Purple Dream. And they were beautiful. They were beautiful. But I ended up getting rid of them because I'm just not a fan of loose powders. I do think that I know enough now about like pigments and stuff like that that I could put them to use in my collection, maybe mix them in with some other things that I maybe want to repress or whatever, or press them myself and gotten some use out of them. But they were beautiful. One was kind of like a pinky orange, and the other one was kind of like a lavender, like silvery, both very in your face, both beautiful, but both loose. And so I got rid of them, but I think about them all the time. It's funny because I've been recently onto the Artist Couture like website looking for these highlights, and I don't think they exist anymore. I didn't find them anyways, but they were a BoxyCharm special apparently. I got one, my mom got one, so I ended up with both of them because my mom won't wear those things. But really sad, when I think about it, really sad I decluttered those because there's a lot I could have done with those these days from a more creative mindset than what kind of mindset I had in makeup back in the day. And then the last thing that I have on here is glowy blushes. Like, I don't know how many glowy blushes I ended up decluttering over the last several years. It's only been this year that I've been really interested in a glowy blush. So prior to this year, anytime I got a glowy blush from BoxyCharm or Ipsy or whatever have you, or like as a gift or whatever, I would end up decluttering it because I just didn't love it. But man, I wish I had those blushes back. Now, there are some that I just didn't like. I don't like NARS Orgasm. That's a glowy blush that I am happy that I ended up decluttering at the end of the day. But there are so many other glowy blushes that I just got rid of because I didn't think I liked glowy blush. And now what I'm wearing today is a Fenty glowy blush. It's the Fenty Cheeks Suede Powder Blush, and it is, I mean, really kind of like a creamy, glowy blush. And this is like totally my jam right now. Now, I don't like highlighter blushes, but I do like a glowy blush, and I wish I had probably 30 blushes that I decluttered back into my collection because they were beautiful glowy blushes, and at the point in time then I didn't like glowy blushes, so I just got rid of them. With that said, that is, I mean, of all the declutters I've done on my channel, like, I'm really happy that my fond memories of products that I've decluttered that I wish I had back, I'm really glad that this is the list. Now, I didn't go through every single one of my declutter videos to like reminisce about all the declutters that I made and what products. I'd probably then have a list of like 50 or 60,000 items. I'm just kidding. 50 or 60 more items than what I have for you. But these are things that I know I think about all the time. These are things that I remember being in my collection that I miss having in my collection. And whether I watch a video or not, I remember them being in my collection. And that, I think, is the biggest piece of this, because there are so many other products that I've had in my collection that I don't remember even existing. So there's that. With that said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this little travel down memory lane in the declutters of my history and some of the products that I miss having in my collection because I have decluttered them. And I hope that you guys have an idea of like 1 or 2 items that you've decluttered or thrown away or gotten rid of in your makeup collection that you could tell me down in the comments section, so we can like commiserate together on the regret of our life. And it's just makeup, but truly, so that we can commiserate together. I would be happy to, you know, give you a hug on those products that you've decluttered that you wish you hadn't decluttered. So let me know down in the comment section. I'd be interested to hear from you down there. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope that you and yours are well. I hope that you are all safe and healthy and getting along as best that you can. I hope that you are all loving each other, being kind humans, and living your best life. And until next time, bye, friends.